Welcome to the Layman Seminary. What we're going to be doing in this video right here is going into more detail about inheritance. I briefly introduced it in the previous video, Final Destiny and Genesis Part 1. So we'll continue from here, and I will be supplementing each time the book chapter, I go through the chapter concerning the Bible. I will come back and trace this as well. I think that's the general theme that I'm doing this as. So anyway, we're working it out. So here we go. Okay, so I'm going to be exposing y'all. Some people may already know this, but I'm going to be talking about three different Hebrew words that are used in the book of Genesis that relate to the concept of inheritance. Okay, inheritance, possession, portion, those things like that. And I'll just introduce these words. We're going to explain each one as we go. This is Nekala, and it's share or inheritance. This one is Yarash, and it can mean to drive out, which is interesting because a lot of the passages, I don't know if all, but a lot of the ones that I saw, whenever it talks about driving out their enemies and stuff, it uses this word. To take possession, to inherit, to dispossess, to destroy, and a couple other options that we'll explore in a minute. And then you have Helek, which is share, allotment, lot, plot, and so on. So we're going to be evaluating these words. The first word that we're coming to is Yarash. As I mentioned before, it can mean to drive out, take possession, to inherit, okay? To destroy even, because this I think this should be factored in to the sense of to impoverish, because there's some New Testament passages that talk about destroy, as well as some other passages in the Old Testament later on in Progressive Revelation that people that have difficulties with and have developed certain doctrines based off of. And I haven't connected all the dots yet, but possibly an understanding of Yarash to mean destroy in these inheritance contexts could place that idea in context, that in some places destroying maybe in the sense of losing your inheritance, coming to a ruin, your loss of legacy, those things like that. Okay. All right. The first thing I did, well, at least that I'm showing right here, is the first word we're dealing with is Yarash. And this chart shows you the blue is the Torah, in other words, the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible. The Nevi'im are the prophets, and the Ketuvim are the writing. Now you'll notice that the book of Deuteronomy uses this word to possess more than any other book of the Old Testament. And that's because Deuteronomy is like a sermon preparing the second generation Israelites for going into the land to possess it. But you'll also see an increase in intensity concerning the word for to possess, Yarash. It's mentioned in Genesis, but it's not mentioned as much in Exodus, which makes sense because they're not dealing with the land yet. And same thing with Leviticus, but Numbers, as they're getting closer and closer to going into the land and they're being disobedient and stuff, this issue of possession comes up and dispossession. So to narrow that down I know this is distorted. There's an option in Logos to zoom. I haven't figured out how to do it yet, but you can see here that Deuteronomy significantly has a lot more emphasis on that Yarash word, not Darash. All right, so here's our second word that we're going to be looking at, and this is Helek, okay? And my throat's dry. 1 second, guys. Helek can refer to allotment, a share. There's some passages in the New Testament that talk about portion or inheritance idea, and so it could be related to that as well. So think about the implications concerning that. Eventually, in future videos, we'll make the connection between the Greek and the Hebrew, but right now we're just dealing with the Hebrew. All right, so we're going in here. Same thing we did with Yarash. And once again, we see the same pattern, at least in Deuteronomy, that there's a whole lot mentioned there. Now, you can also notice that in the book of Joshua, that's where the most occurrences occur, because that's where they're actually conquering the land, and that's where they're dividing up the land by its portion of inheritance. So that makes sense. Ecclesiastics has a lot of references to it, and that makes sense because it's talking about man's portion underneath the sun. In other words, what man has, what man's about, whether it's valuable, whether it's what wasteless, is chasing the wind, all the stuff done under the sun. That idea there. Once again, here we have it blown up, distorted, but still seeing Deuteronomy being dominant here. Okay, our next word, Nekala, is share or inheritance or property. Okay, and you notice here that in Deuteronomy it actually shows up more. Okay, more than Deuteronomy, but once again Joshua dominates in that area. And so I think the idea is that this is talking about the inheritance and more the noun form. And so what you're seeing is that if you combine all three of these words together, you definitely see them clustering in the first 5 books of the Bible. And so there's a really big emphasis there. And then in future videos, once I finish the Pentateuch, I'm going to go into Joshua, and by then we'll try to do a cumulative adding up of all this at that time. So continuing on, there's our word again. Numbers is leading there. All right, so as we're going into Genesis, of course, we got to be mindful of God's calling to Abraham, the promise that he was given. And then what's interesting is that before he's given the Abrahamic covenant in covenant form, it was given in promise in Genesis 12, but in 15 in covenant form, he goes to war with those kings. And so in Genesis 14:24, it says, I will take nothing except what the young men have eaten and the share of the men who went with me. Aner, Eshcol, Memer, let them take their share. Now this word share is halak, that we saw a while ago. And that's kind of interesting because the idea is that because Abram in service to the Lord does not take his share because he's trusting in the Lord, so the Lord gives him an inheritance. In other words, there's an inheritance or share portion motif idea going on here. All right. Whenever I did this, I went to Bible.org, Bible.org, and I selected the word portion here. Now I did it in Logos too, but I wanted something that cut across all the Greek and the Hebrew words so that I could see, how it is, and then narrow it down to Genesis. And then I went back through and I studied each one of those Hebrew words. So this is something free online that you can do. Go to Bible.org. I think it's called the Lumina tool or whatever, but you'll see it there. And so I have portion and exact and by book. And so these are the responses of Genesis, and I had them in verse order. Here, I'm running it through Logos here, and you can see the range of meaning that is possibly involved here. And then this is the word again, blown up. I also went and I searched the actual Hebrew word throughout the Hebrew text, the Lexham Hebrew Interlinear, and then the NASB right here. And so I went through and put everything in chronological order rather than topical order, because Dillo in Final Destiny, he does things in more of a topical order rather than chronological order. So I think that by doing a little bit in each book, that provides people with context so that they can internalize these words and the motifs and stuff like that. Okay, Genesis 15:1, where the word of the Lord came right after that battle. He told Abram, do not fear, I am a shield to you. Your reward shall be very great. So you got this idea of reward, and then Abram replies, oh Lord God, what will you give me since I am childless and the heir of my house is Eleazar? So there's the idea of inheritance there. And so he's associating with reward. I didn't do a word study on reward right here. I wrote a paper on Genesis 15, so it's covered in that. So I may do some of that later on, flashback to that. All right, so Genesis 15:5, we keep going. He promises them that he'll have, descendants from his own loins, basically. Then he believed in the Lord, right? He reckoned to his righteousness. He said, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of Chaldeans to give you the land to possess it. Now, this word possess, we're going to be talking about in more detail in a minute. He said, Oh Lord, how may I know that I will possess it? Well, this is our word possess. This is the study for Yarash and the various references and all of that stuff. So here we are with our word Yarash, and we're going to just walk through the Bible. Did the same thing here, except the first time I did it by relevance, instead of verse order. And so later on, I went back and fixed that. I think, yeah, now it's verse order right here. All right, same thing as I explained before. I just want to show y'all my methodology so that y'all could go back and do this word study. In other words, I didn't just trust Dillo's work on his word studies. I wanted to go back and study and mainly to do it, put the information in an easier way to understand, because you can do a whole lot more in segments on videos than you can when writing a book. Writing is more compressed, and so for those that are visual learners, hopefully this helps, visual and audio. And Abram said, since you have given no offspring to me, one born in my house is my heir. Then behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, this man will not be your heir, but one who will come forth from your own body shall be your heir. So this is the word Yarash being used here. And then right here, so after he talks about so shall your descendants be, and then he says right here that I will give you the land to possess it. So that's where we're at right now, talking about. And then he said, how will I know that I may possess it or will possess it? And then he keeps going on, and he gives them the Abrahamic covenant, promising the land boundaries and all of that. We talked about that in the last video. Now, we also talked about in the last video, and I'll reiterate here, this idea that even though the covenant is unconditional, not my favorite term for it, permanent, everlasting, eternal, non-dependent on Abram to keep, there were conditions for blessing. And so he's told to walk before him and be blameless. All right, so then we keep going, and he mentions the issue of circumcision, because circumcision was how one was to be obedient as a sign of the covenant. So there's that factor. You keep going on, and then 21:10. Therefore she said to Abram, drive out this maid and her son. That's interesting, because this word drive is not Yarash, it's Garash, it looks like. So there might be a pun later on developed the scripture. I'm not sure, I haven't researched it. For the son of this maid shall not be an heir with my son Isaac. So this is the distinction going on between the two sons. We have the idea of sojourning, just to remind us that sojourning just basically means that you didn't possess the property of the land. You lived there, but you didn't possess it. Almost like you're renting a house, it's yours in the future, but not yet, that type of thing. So Genesis 22:17, he talks about right here, and your seed shall possess the gate of your enemies. Same word, Yarash. Now this right here, the Logos, whenever you're running the word for Yarash, it also brings up the senses. And the senses cut across the various words, because it's looking at things at a semantic domain level. And so you have Yarash, Kana, Nakah, I think that's Kesin, and then Kateko. So you got, even for the Septuagint, probably there, and possibly maybe even in the New Testament. But so this gives you an idea of other stuff you could go back and study. In this video, I'm not dealing with Kana, and I don't think I'm dealing with Nakal, but you can see how Nakala, the inheritance form of the word, I'm using there, and I'm not dealing with this one right now. So if y'all want to extend that research, just grab you one of these words and run for it and see if it occurs in Genesis. Okay. And I know Kana does, because God describes himself as a possessor of the earth and things like that. And I may emphasize that in another video. But moving on. Genesis 24:60. They blessed Rebekah, said to her, may you, our sister, become thousands and 10,000s, and may your descendants possess the gates of those who hate them. So there's a reiteration of that promise that was mentioned earlier. Promise, prophecy. Genesis 28:4. May he also give you the blessing of Abraham to you and to your descendants with you, that you may possess the land of your sojourning. So you see there's a distinction here between sojourning and possessing the land. Okay. Now in this particular passage, this is where we have, what did I say that word is? It'll come up in a minute. That the first word we encountered in the Hebrew starts with a H or hard H. And then there's the other one, Nekelah. So you have right here, Rachel and Leah said to him, do we still have any portion or inheritance in our father's house? This is whenever they're fixing to leave with Jacob and all of that. All right, so there I am going using inheritance on Bible.org to get it limited to the book. And then here we are, Nekelah. Since I already did the other word in the beginning, I don't reiterate it here. I'm just going with this word. Again, another passage talking about sojourning where Abram and Isaac sojourned. Interesting here in 45:11. There I would provide for you, and there were 5 years of famine to come, and you and your household and all that you have would be impoverished. So this is the idea of the inheritance. I think this is Yarash. And dispossessed, impoverished, these ideas associated with ruin and stuff. And mistell my father of all my splendor in Egypt. So this is what Joseph is saying to his brothers, and he's describing that they would have been in ruin, which would have been they would definitely be poor, but eventually they could possibly even die. So I just want to show that range. 48:6. But your offspring that you have been born after them shall be yours. They shall be called by the names of their brothers in their inheritance. So again, here's the idea of inheritance, and this is I think Nekelah right here in this particular word. It's going on. This is a reminder about Reuben, who was the firstborn, but didn't get to have preeminence. In other words, he didn't have the inheritance that he received. So it just reminds you that just because you're a firstborn son does not mean that you will necessarily inherit. Genesis 50:23, I think. Joseph saw the third generation Ephraim's sons, the sons of Machir and the sons of Manasseh were born on Joseph's knees. Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die, but God will surely take care of you and bring you up from this land to the land which he promised an oath. So this is just conceptually reminding us that here's Joseph's heirs, if you will, and this is he's about to go into the land. But he's going to die. So he's going to go in the land in a coffin. All right. And that's it. Well, if that helped you understand a little bit more about the concept of inheritance, then I think that was a successful study. Like I said, it takes a lot to simplify some of the things that Dillon mentioned, because it's just a massive book. But I'm attempting to do that so that people can interact with it in a different way. And so if you've been blessed by this, subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the bell if you want notifications. Give us a thumbs up. Share this with others. And most of all, keep this ministry in prayer. God bless.